I have heard some rumors. Despite the length of your marriage, you have still not presented His Majesty with a child.
Why should they say so?
6 wives, countless mistresses, 11 pregnancies, yet only 4 children lived past infancy. History tells us the king's marriages failed because of the women. Catherine of Aragon couldn't give him a son. Anne Boleyn mocked his performance in bed. Anne of Cleves couldn't attract him. Catherine Howard was promiscuous. Catherine Parr was infertile. But what if the problem wasn't them at all? In my last video, we explored the mystical curses haunting the Tudors. But what if the curse wasn't spiritual at all? What if it was written into the very DNA of King Henry VIII himself? And what if the king, the very man who executed wives, humiliated queens, and reshaped England, was the tragedy hidden behind the crown? Today, we're uncovering the truth behind Henry VIII's fertility crisis and why Henry's ability to father children vanished completely in his final years.
Welcome back to History Untold. I'm Alex, and together we'll uncover the hidden secrets of the past.
If these untold stories speak to you, hit the like button and join our family. Let's step into the past together. May 15th, 1536. The Tower of London is cold, its stone walls pressing in on the makeshift courtroom where George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford, stands accused of crimes so terrible that even speaking them feels like poison on the tongue. Treason, adultery with the Queen, incest with his own sister. The charges are absurd, fabricated by Thomas Cromwell and Henry VIII to destroy the Boleyns. George knows he's already dead. This trial is merely theater, a performance designed to justify what the king has already decided. The prosecution presents their evidence, built on the testimony of frightened servants and tortured musicians. Then they hand George a piece of paper, and the instructions are clear. Read this silently, acknowledge the charge with a simple yes or no, and move on. But George Boleyn is not a man who follows instructions when his life is already forfeit. He reads the paper aloud, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom, ensuring that every nobleman, every ambassador, every witness present hears the words that were meant to stay hidden. That he and his sister Anne had discussed the king's private matters, that they had gossiped and laughed about Henry's failures in the bedroom. That the Queen herself had complained to her brother that the king had neither vigor nor virtue between the sheets. The room erupts, gasps, whispers, shock. This is not just treason. This is the ultimate humiliation for a king who built his entire identity on being virile, powerful, and masculine. George has just made Henry VIII's most shameful secret public knowledge. Whether Anne actually said those words, we'll never know, but because George read that accusation aloud, because he refused to let it die in silence, we have a record of it, a whisper that traveled through ambassadors' letters and courtiers' gossip and historical documents for 500 years. 4 days later, on May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn is beheaded. George dies 2 days before her, along with 4 other men accused of adultery with the Queen. And Henry? He marries Jane Seymour 11 days after Anne's execution, desperate to prove that he can still father sons, that the problem was never him, that his virility remains intact. But the cracks are already showing. To understand Henry VIII's fertility crisis, you have to understand what drove him, what consumed him, what poisoned every relationship he ever had. Sons. Not just one son, many sons. Kings needed heirs to secure their dynasty and project power. Henry's father, Henry VII, had won the crown on the battlefield at Bosworth in 1485, ending 30 years of brutal civil war. The Tudor dynasty was new and fragile, built on victory in war rather than ancient bloodlines. One failed succession could drag England straight back into chaos.
So when 17-year-old Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon in June 1509, the pressure was immediate. Produce sons, secure the dynasty, prove that the Tudors weren't just lucky upstarts, but legitimate rulers blessed by God. By September 1509, Catherine was pregnant. The court celebrated, prayers filled the chapels, gifts were commissioned, everything seemed perfect. Then, on January 31st, 1510, Catherine miscarried a baby girl at 3 or 4 months of gestation, far enough along that the physicians could determine the child's sex, but not far enough for the baby to survive. Henry was disappointed but not alarmed. They would try again. By the autumn of 1510, Catherine was pregnant again, and this time she carried the child to term. Then, on January 1st, 1511, New Year's Day, Prince Henry was born. He was healthy, loud, and perfect. At last, the Tudor dynasty had its long-awaited male heir. Henry VIII is ecstatic. He's done it. He's secured the future. For 52 days, England has a Prince of Wales. Then, on February 22nd, 1511, the baby dies. No warning, no clear illness, just a sudden, inexplicable death that shatters Catherine and leaves Henry reeling, searching for answers that don't exist. Tudor medicine could only shrug and call it God's will. There was no time to grieve properly. The dynasty still needed securing, and Catherine was young. This was surely just bad luck, a tragedy, not a pattern. Not yet. September 17, 1513. Catherine gives birth to another boy. But he's premature and stillborn. Henry is in France, leading a military campaign. He isn't due back until late October. He wouldn't have left England if he believed the birth was close. Catherine is left alone, burying another son, while her husband is hundreds of miles away. November 1514. Another pregnancy, another boy. But he survives only minutes after birth. Catherine's grief no longer fades. It settles in, a constant weight, a shadow that never lifts. 3 sons, 3 deaths. The whispers begin. Quiet at first, then louder. In Tudor England, people believe a woman's body determines the child's sex, so the blame turns toward Catherine. Is the queen cursed? Is God punishing them for some hidden sin? Henry says nothing in public, but in private, doubt starts to grow. Then, on February 18, 1516, Catherine gives birth to a healthy baby girl, Princess Mary. She survives, grows into a bright, intelligent child, but she isn't a boy. In the 16th century, daughters are not heirs to the throne. England has never had a ruling queen. The idea feels unnatural, even dangerous, a recipe for weakness and chaos. Still, Mary's survival brings hope, proof that Catherine can deliver a living child. Maybe the next pregnancy will finally bring a prince. But on November 10, 1518, Catherine gives birth to a stillborn girl. It is the last time she becomes pregnant. Catherine is 33 years old. She never conceives again. Let that sink in. 6 pregnancies in 9 years. Her body was never given time to heal. 5 dead children. Endless pressure to produce a male heir. She begins to doubt herself. She fasts for days. Depression and relentless strain wear her down, aging her beyond her years. Her entire worth reduced to one thing: her womb. Henry grows colder. Not openly cruel, just distant, disappointed. His affection was slowly curdling into resentment. Catherine is a good wife, a good queen, devout, dignified, loyal. But she cannot give him what he believes he needs. Then, in 1519, everything changes. A teenage girl named Elizabeth Blount, Bessie to her friends, gives birth to a healthy baby boy. Henry's boy. And Henry does something shocking. He claims the child publicly, naming him Henry Fitzroy,
Duke of Richmond, showering him with titles and wealth. This is unprecedented. Kings have illegitimate children all the time. They just don't acknowledge them like this. Why does Henry do it? Because Bessie's son proves something that Catherine's tragic history had thrown into doubt. Henry VIII can father healthy boys. His body works. His seed is strong. So the problem, he decides, must be Catherine. But is he right?
By the late 1520s, Henry is obsessed with a woman who will change England forever, Anne Boleyn. He decides to annul his marriage to Catherine. He breaks from the Catholic Church entirely, declares himself supreme head of the Church of England, dissolves monasteries, executes opponents, and tears apart the religious and political fabric of the nation, all for the sons she will give him. They marry secretly on January 25, 1533, and by September 7, 1533, Anne gives birth to a girl, Elizabeth. Henry's disappointment is clear, yet hope lingers. He believes Anne will give him a son next time because she is able to bear children. In the summer of 1534, Anne seems pregnant again. Court letters and ambassador reports show she is visibly pregnant, but what happens next is a mystery. Miscarriage, stillbirth, no one knows. What matters is that no child is born, and the pressure on her grows heavier, her anxiety consuming her from the inside out. By October 1535, she's pregnant again, and this time she's even more desperate, more terrified, because she can feel Henry slipping away, his attention wandering toward other women, his patience wearing thin. Then disaster strikes. January 24th, 1536. Henry is jousting when his horse falls on him. He's unconscious for 2 hours, his life hanging by a thread, and when Anne, 5 months pregnant, hears the news, she's overcome with terror that he might die, that she might be left alone and vulnerable with only a daughter as protection. 5 days later, on January 29th, Anne miscarries a boy at about 15 weeks of gestation. She tells Henry the shock of his accident caused the miscarriage, but Henry doesn't care about explanations anymore. He's done with Anne. He's convinced himself that she tricked him, bewitched him, used some dark magic to seduce him into destroying his marriage and his kingdom for nothing. Henry is already courting Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, a quiet, obedient woman, quite the opposite of Anne. By April, Anne is arrested on charges of adultery, treason, and incest. May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn is beheaded on Tower Green. 11 days later, Henry marries Jane Seymour.
Henry is 45 now, his health visibly declining from the jousting accident that left him with a leg wound that refuses to heal, constantly oozing pus and causing agonizing pain that makes him irritable and violent. He's gaining weight rapidly, moving less, eating more, his once athletic body deteriorating into something unrecognizable. Then, in October 1536, Jane conceives. The pregnancy proceeds smoothly, progress toward the birth that Henry has spent nearly 30 years waiting for. October 12, 1537, after a long and difficult labor, Jane gives birth to a healthy boy, Prince Edward. England explodes in celebration. This is it. This is what everything was for. The broken marriages, the executed wives, the religious upheaval, the years of anxiety and fear. Henry finally has his legitimate male heir. But the celebration is short-lived. Jane develops a fever within days of the birth, probably from an infection caused by the trauma of delivery or from retained placenta, conditions that modern medicine treats easily, but that Tudor physicians have no ability to cure. October 24, 1537, Jane Seymour dies. She's 29 years old. Henry is devastated, genuinely grief-stricken in a way he never was for Catherine or Anne.
and years later, when he writes his will, he requests to be buried beside Jane because she gave him what no one else could, a son. But here's what matters for our story. Jane conceived Edward in early January 1537, which proves that Henry was still capable of fathering children at age 45. But Edward was Henry's last child, and that was unusual for the time. In the 16th century, men often had children well into their 40s and 50s. So why did Henry have no more children after Edward? Did his health have something to do with it? We'll discuss the real issue behind it shortly, but first, let's see how we know the problem exists.
On January 6, 1540, Henry marries Anne of Cleves, a German princess chosen for political reasons. Her brother is a Protestant duke, and England needs Protestant allies against Catholic Europe. But from their first meeting, something goes wrong. Henry had seen her portrait, painted by Hans Holbein the Younger, the same artist who painted Henry and all his previous wives. The portrait shows a pleasant-looking woman, nothing extraordinary, but certainly not ugly. Based on this portrait and positive reports from ambassadors, Henry expected someone attractive. Instead, when he meets Anne in person at Rochester, he's disappointed, though whether his disappointment stems from her actual appearance or from his own declining virility is impossible to say. They marry anyway, because backing out would create a diplomatic disaster for Henry VIII. And that's when the real problem reveals itself. Henry cannot consummate the marriage. He tries, he fails, and in desperation he confesses this failure to his doctor. But, and this is critical, he immediately shifts the blame onto Anne. She's unattractive, he claims. She disgusts him. Her body doesn't arouse him. He even insists he had 2 nocturnal pollutions that same night, wet dreams, as proof that his body functions perfectly fine when presented with the right woman. The problem, he insists, is Anne. But look at the evidence objectively. No contemporary source except Henry calls Anne ugly. The imperial ambassador describes her as agreeable. Courtiers find her polite and pleasant. Even Holbein's portrait, which we can still see today, shows an unremarkable but perfectly acceptable face. Is Henry lying? In my personal opinion, yes. Admitting impotence would have shattered his carefully built image of masculine power, cast doubt on his ability to have more sons, and made him look weak in a world where royal authority depends on showing strength. So, in this view, Anne ends up taking the blame for Henry's failing body. I want to stress, though, this is just my opinion. There's no historical document proving it. It's what I've concluded from the sources I've read. And as you'll see later, this isn't just Anne. Henry's last 2 wives seem to face the same problem. But what do you think? Am I suspecting too much? Or does this make sense to you too? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. By July 1540, the marriage of Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves is annulled. Anne, intelligent enough to recognize the danger of fighting Henry, she saw what happened to Anne Boleyn, agrees to everything. Henry rewards her cooperation with estates, a generous income, and the honorary title King's Beloved Sister. Anne lives comfortably in England for 17 more years, never remarrying, and dies peacefully in 1557. She's the only one of Henry's wives to survive both the marriage and the king. But Henry doesn't wait to move on. July 28, 1540. Less than 3 weeks after his annulment from Anne of Cleves, Henry marries Catherine Howard. She's 19 years old, beautiful, full of youthful energy. Everything the aging, obese, pain-ridden king is not. Surely this young girl will reignite his passion. Surely she'll give him more sons, backups for Edward, insurance for the dynasty. But Catherine never conceives, not once in the nearly 2 years of their marriage. This is strange. She's 19, at the peak of her fertility. If the problem were hers, we'd expect at least 1 pregnancy, even if it ended in miscarriage. But nothing happens, which suggests the problem is Henry's.
whether from declining fertility or simply lack of opportunity because his health makes intimacy difficult or impossible. By late 1541, rumors emerged that Catherine had affairs before her marriage and possibly during it. Whether these affairs actually happened, or whether Catherine was guilty of nothing more than youthful indiscretion and poor judgment, Henry believes the accusations. February 13th, 1542. Catherine Howard is beheaded. She's barely 20 years old, crying for mercy as they lead her to the scaffold. Henry is 50 years old now, massively obese, his infected leg wound rotting and stinking, barely able to walk without assistance. His courtiers have to carry him upstairs. His temper is explosive and unpredictable. He's a shadow of the athletic young king who took the throne 33 years earlier. But in July 1543, he marries one more time. Catherine Parr is 31, smart, educated, and twice widowed. Neither of her previous marriages produced children, but in both cases, her husbands were too sick to really be husbands. Catherine's role had been more caretaker than wife. But Catherine never conceives with Henry, not once in their 4 years together. Still, the court whispers that she must be infertile, never stopping to consider that the problem might lie with Henry himself. After Henry dies on January 28, 1547, Catherine marries Thomas Seymour, Jane Seymour's brother and young Edward VI's uncle, and almost immediately becomes pregnant. She gives birth to a daughter, Mary Seymour. Catherine's pregnancy proves definitively what the evidence had been suggesting for years. She wasn't infertile. The difficulties in having children, it seems, may have been due to the king himself. But that still doesn't explain the earlier tragedies: Catherine of Aragon's nightmare string of losses, Anne Boleyn's miscarriages, the infant deaths that haunted the Tudor nursery. For that, we need to understand the medical theories.
So what really happened? Why did so many Tudor pregnancies end in tragedy? For centuries, people blamed divine punishment. God was angry at Henry for his sins, for divorcing Catherine, for breaking from Rome, for executing Anne Boleyn. But modern medicine offers different, more scientific explanations, and some are more plausible than others. The diabetes myth. People love to diagnose Henry VIII with type 2 diabetes, and on the surface it makes sense. By his 40s, Henry is massively overweight. His armor from 1540 suggests a waist circumference of 54 inches. He has a chronic leg wound that won't heal. He's constantly tired. His temper is erratic, all symptoms consistent with diabetes. Diabetes can also cause erectile dysfunction, which would explain Henry's impotence with Anne of Cleves and his lack of children with Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr. But here's the problem. Diabetes affects the man's fertility and sexual function, not the woman's ability to carry a pregnancy to term. If Henry had diabetes, it would explain why he stopped fathering children after Edward's birth in 1537, but it doesn't explain Catherine of Aragon's 5 miscarriages and stillbirths. It doesn't explain Anne Boleyn's losses. It doesn't explain why so many Tudor babies died at or shortly after birth. Diabetes isn't the answer, at least not the complete answer. The syphilis fiction. In 1888, a doctor named Andrew Curry published a paper claiming Henry VIII had syphilis, and the theory spread like wildfire because it fit the narrative. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease that, if untreated, can cause miscarriages, stillbirths, premature births, and infant deaths from congenital syphilis. It can also cause rashes, lesions, hair loss, dementia, and eventually death. The problem? There's no evidence that Henry or any of his wives had syphilis. Syphilis has clear, visible symptoms: painful sores, distinctive rashes on the palms and soles, patchy hair loss, lesions in the mouth and throat. In its later stages, it causes blindness, paralysis, and severe mental deterioration. Henry had none of these symptoms. Neither did Catherine of Aragon. Neither did Anne Boleyn or Jane Seymour.
And critically, neither did any of Henry's surviving children. Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward all lived into adulthood without showing any signs of congenital syphilis. Moreover, syphilis was treated with mercury in Tudor England. There are no records of Henry or his wives receiving mercury treatments, which physicians would have documented because mercury was expensive and dangerous. And here's the final nail in this theory's coffin. Henry's mistresses, Bessie Blount and Mary Boleyn, both went on to have healthy children with their subsequent husbands. If Henry had syphilis, he would have infected them, and they would have passed it to their husbands and children. But they didn't. The syphilis theory is Victorian fiction, nothing more. The blood incompatibility answer. This is where modern medicine offers a real, plausible explanation. In 2010, researchers Katrina Banks-Whitley and Kyra Kramer published a paper proposing that Henry VIII was Kell-positive, a rare blood type that can cause devastating pregnancy complications when combined with a Kell-negative partner. Here's how it works. If a man is Kell-positive and a woman is Kell-negative, their first pregnancy usually proceeds normally. But during delivery or miscarriage, the mother's blood mixes with the baby's blood, and her immune system becomes sensitized to the Kell antigen. From that point forward, her body treats any future Kell-positive baby as a foreign invader. Her immune system attacks the baby's blood cells, causing severe anemia, heart failure, miscarriage, stillbirth, or death within days or weeks of birth. This pattern fits Catherine of Aragon perfectly. Her first pregnancy in 1510 might have sensitized her immune system. Every subsequent Kell-positive baby would have been attacked and rejected. But Princess Mary survived, possibly because Mary was Kell-negative like her mother, so Catherine's immune system didn't attack her. The same explanation works for Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth's birth in 1533 could have sensitized Anne. Her subsequent pregnancies, the possible miscarriage in 1534 and the definite miscarriage in January 1536, both ended in loss because those babies were Kell-positive. Bessie Blount and Jane Seymour each had only one pregnancy with Henry, so no pattern of sensitization would have developed. The researchers even traced Henry's Kell-positivity back through his family tree to his great-grandmother Jacquetta of Luxembourg, noting that several of her male-line descendants experienced similar reproductive problems. There's another possibility, too, rhesus incompatibility, which works almost identically to Kell incompatibility. If Henry was Rh positive and his partners were Rh negative, the same pattern of sensitization and pregnancy loss would occur. Both theories are plausible. Both fit the historical evidence. We'll never know for certain without testing their blood, which obviously we can't do 500 years later. But what we do know is this. Henry's fertility problems weren't divine punishment. They weren't the result of syphilis or moral failing. They were biology. A cruel genetic accident that destroyed pregnancies, shattered queens, and tore England apart. But there's one more piece to this puzzle, and it's the hardest to quantify: the mind. Henry's impotence in his later years almost certainly had a psychological component, because impotence is rarely purely physical. It's often a combination of body and mind, especially in cases where the physical problems are intermittent. Think about Henry's emotional journey. He spent years fighting for Anne Boleyn, destroying his marriage to Catherine, breaking from Rome, facing down the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, risking rebellion and invasion, all because he convinced himself that Anne would give him sons. And she didn't. She gave him a daughter, then miscarried twice, and Henry had to face the possibility that he'd destroyed everything for nothing. The psychological impact of that realization must have been devastating. The shame, the humiliation, the crushing sense of having made a catastrophic mistake. Henry dealt with it by rewriting history in his mind, convincing himself that Anne had bewitched him, that she'd used dark magic to seduce him into marriage, that nothing was his fault. Then came the humiliation with Anne of Cleves, his inability to consummate the marriage, the mortifying experience of having to confess his impotence to his doctor while desperately insisting it was Anne's fault, not his. Shame and fear can destroy sexual function as surely as any physical illness. The more Henry failed, the more anxious he would have become about failing again, creating a vicious cycle where anxiety caused impotence, which caused more anxiety. Add to this the chronic physical pain from his ulcerated leg, which was constantly infected and agonizing. Chronic pain destroys libido, makes intimacy difficult or impossible, and drains the energy and will required for sexual activity. And there's the sheer stress of ruling a fractious kingdom during a time of religious upheaval, threats from Catholic Europe, rebellions at home, and constant fear that his dynasty would collapse if Edward died young. Is it any wonder Henry struggled in the bedroom? But here's the cruelest irony of all. Henry spent his entire life blaming everyone but himself. He blamed Catherine of Aragon for not producing sons when her pregnancy losses were likely caused by incompatibility with his blood. He blamed Anne Boleyn for miscarrying when the crushing pressure he put her under certainly contributed to her stress and possibly to her losses. He blamed Anne of Cleves for being unattractive when his own body was failing him. And he married Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr, expecting them to produce more sons when he was already impotent and infertile. Henry's obsession with male heirs destroyed 6 women and many courtiers' lives, and accomplished nothing in the end.
Let's look at what Henry actually achieved with all his marriages, divorces, and executions. Catherine of Aragon, divorced, separated from her daughter, died alone and heartbroken in 1536. Anne Boleyn, beheaded in 1536 on fabricated charges. Jane Seymour died at 29 from childbirth complications. Anne of Cleves was humiliated and cast aside. While many of us think Anne of Cleves moved on and lived a peaceful life, but that's not how she felt in 1540. She was judged, humiliated, and had to navigate life under constant scrutiny, explaining herself and her body to a world that wouldn't let her forget. I'm thinking of making another video on Anne of Cleves' psychological torture. Let me know in the comments if you want me to. Henry destroyed England's religious landscape, executed 2 wives, cast aside 2 more, all to secure male heirs. And in the end, his greatest legacy was Elizabeth, the daughter he rejected. And the curse he spent his life trying to overcome? It wasn't divine punishment, it was genetics. Henry VIII was, in a very real sense, a victim of his own DNA, and so were all the women he married and all the children who died before they could draw more than a few breaths. A king brought low by his own blood. And that's the truth behind Henry VIII's inability to have a surviving son. What do you think? Do you agree that it was biology, or do you see it another way? Let me know in the comments. If you found this story of Henry VIII and the tragedy of his fertility crisis interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from history. And if you want to see another shocking story from history, check out this link. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.